Please turn in your Bibles this morning to Joshua chapter 24 and place a marker in Matthew chapter 13. Joshua 24 and Matthew 13. Today I'm going to be reading from the New International Version. Has anyone here ever had to make a choice? Let's see your hands if you've ever had to make a choice. That's a silly question, right? We all make choices every single day. Just this morning so far, most of you have made hundreds of choices. You made the choice when the alarm went off of were you going to snooze it or were you going to get up? You made the choice of what to wear, or maybe your spouse or your mother did. You made the choice of whether or not to eat breakfast, and if so, what you were going to eat. And everybody made the choice of whether or not you were going to shower and brush your teeth. I have to tell you that several of us are glad that you made the decision that you did on those two things. With as many people as we have in the room, if you had all chosen not to shower and brush, it'd be a pretty raunchy place. So we all make choices, that's a given, but I guess what I really wonder is, how many of you enjoy making choices? Who likes to make choices? There are people who are like that. I think that there are pretty much three types of people when it comes to making choices. The first type is the type that for whom making a choice really isn't a process at all. They just do it. Whatever they feel like doing, they're just going to do it. They're not going to think about the consequences to them or anybody else. For them, they don't mind making choices because it's easy. They just do what feels good. Have you ever met anyone like this? Man, there's people that will change jobs, cars, houses, even spouses on a whim. And they don't ever think about how it's going to affect people. I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you, in some ways, I admire that type of person. The freedom that exists in their lives. In a much bigger way, those people drive me crazy. But in a small way, I admire them. Then there's a second type of person. This person is a bit more cautious. The second type of person usually thinks about at least some of the consequences of their choices. They'll take a bit longer than the first type to make a decision. Their choices are a little more logical or methodical, and usually they yield more stable, if not as fun, results. I wish I could be this type of person. The one that can make decisions easily, but they consider their actions and they think about it. And unfortunately, I tend to hang out more with group number 3. Group number 3 you might call the thinkers. These are the people who think about every decision they make, and they overthink it. Because they're so afraid that they might choose the wrong thing, and if they do, they're going to regret it. This is the person who will stand in Lowe's for an hour and a half reading reviews on their phone before buying a vacuum cleaner. I mean, come on, it's a machine that sucks up dust. Pick one and go, is what Justin said to me. I think the problem with those of us in group 3 is that we know once our decision is made, it's final. And we just don't want to regret it. And it doesn't matter how large the decision is or how small. It doesn't matter if you're deciding what to eat for lunch, or if you're deciding what job to take or what school to go to. Every one yields the same amount of stress for people in group number 3. I learned a trick one time that I think from my daughter that said if you don't know what to decide, flip a coin and then see how you feel about that. And if you regret it, then go the other way. Problem is, I go the other way, then I regret that too. Either way, people in group number 3 are afraid that we're going to choose wrong. I can't imagine being a person in group number 3 in the story that we're going to look at in Joshua chapter 24. In Joshua 24, it's a story about the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel has come into the promised land, the land that God has said that he was going to give them. And he has driven out all the enemies that were there, that lived there before. And they are there, and their leader, Joshua, is about to die. But unfortunately, what's happened is over the years, as they've been coming into the land and overtaking it, they've picked up some bad habits along the way. They're worshiping idols, and they're worshiping some of the false gods that the people who used to live there worshipped. So Joshua calls everybody together, and then he tells them what all the Lord has done for them. He recaps the whole story from Abraham forward. Says there was Abraham, and God promised to make him a great nation, and then there was Isaac, and he just goes down the list, and then he tells them about the time in Egypt when they were in slavery and God leading them out, and then wandering through the wilderness for 40 years, and then now you're in the promised land. And then in Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 and 15, he tells them that it's time to make a choice. Let's look at those scriptures. Joshua 24, 14 and 15 in the New International Version says this: "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods that your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." Verse number 15, he says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you," in other words, if it doesn't sound good, "then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods that your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Choose this day whom you're going to serve. Man, that's a lot bigger decision than a vacuum cleaner, isn't it? I don't know that I would do well put in this situation. Choose right now, this day, who you're going to serve, and you got one day to do it. You got one day to make the decision. For that matter, if it was afternoon, you may only have a few hours left. Choose this day. Man, imagine if you made the wrong choice on that one. People in group 3 that day were just stressed out. Is anyone else in group 3? Is anyone like me? You're like, man, I just don't want to make the wrong decision. Some of you are trying to decide right now whether to commit to be in group 3 or not. If that's you, you're in it. Raise your hand or don't. You're one of us. And if that's you, I want to tell you about some books that are either going to paralyze you or completely and totally set you free. These books are called Choose Your Own Adventure books. Anybody ever read the Choose Your Own Adventure series? Man, those are so cool. All the people who are under 40 are like, what are you talking about? These books, if you're not familiar with them, are children's fictional books. But in these books, they're usually mysteries. You get to choose the actions that the main character takes. And in doing so, you kind of choose how the story ends up. So you'll be reading along, and all of a sudden a decision will need to be made. For example, you might be on page 24, and the character in the story comes to a ravine. And there's a rope bridge over the ravine, but it looks a little bit sketchy. And you get to choose, do you want to try to cross the rope bridge, or do you want to go and try to find another way? And the book will say, if you want to try to cross the bridge, turn to page 40 and keep reading. But if you want to try to turn around and go find another way, then turn to page 32 and keep reading. And then you turn to whatever page it is based on the decision that you have made, and you pick up the story from there until you get to another decision. And this happens. There are probably, in these little kids' books, man, there are probably 20, 25 decisions that have to be made. And sometimes it will even wrap around, and you'll end up back at the same place you were, making the same decision again. And you're like, well, I did that wrong. Let's try again. I think these books were kind of the precursor to video games, because they were around before video games existed, and it was the only way you could be like, hey, I want to tell this story, which direction to take. It was either read Choose Your Own Adventure or play Oregon Trail. But these books teach kids about making choices and about thinking about the effects of the choices that they make. It teaches kids about life, really, because life is essentially a series of choices, right? I don't know who the first person to say this was, because the internet credits like 30 different people. But there's a quote that says that your life today is the sum total of all the choices you have made. Isn't that the truth? You're here today because of choices that you made. You chose to go to school to become a teacher, so you're off in the summertime. You chose to buy a home in Lowell, so you live in the best city in Northwest Arkansas. You chose to have kids, so you're broke and tired. That's why these Choose Your Own Adventure books are such valuable training for life, because they teach you about making decisions, making choices, and then the effects that your choices have. I think that's also why Jesus used these books in his teaching. Don't look at me like that. We all know that Jesus taught using parables, right? Well, I don't want to assume that. Let me just teach you something right now. I'm going to teach you something. Everybody ready? Take notes here. Jesus taught using parables. A parable is just a story. It's a story that illustrates a point. And Jesus used them to teach all the time. And some of the parables that he used were Choose Your Own Adventure parables. I can show you one. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 13. We're going to start reading in verse number 3. Matthew 13, beginning in verse number 3. Says, then he told them many things in parables. Everybody say parables. Saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seeds, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Verse 7, other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. When Jesus told this story, he was in a region called Galilee. For those who don't know, Galilee was an area that was very heavy in agriculture. In fact, there's several stories surrounding this one where Jesus uses other parables that talk about agriculture. Jesus was pretty cool like that. He was a good teacher because he knew his audience. And so he would use parables or stories that would help his audience connect because they understood what he was talking about. In fact, after he told this parable, his disciples asked him why he always taught this way. They said, why do you always teach using these stories, Jesus? And he told them, I do it so that people can understand the secrets of the kingdom of God. Isn't that cool? Jesus wanted us to understand, so he used stories where people could understand. Then he goes on in verses 18 through 23 of this chapter to explain what this parable about the farmer and the sowing of seeds meant. Now, we're not going to read those scriptures. You can read them later, but we are going to talk about them today. Jesus says there are 4 types of soil in this story where the seed was scattered. The first was on the path. The path is where people walked and where animals were ridden and chariots and wagons were used. On the path, the soil was beaten down. It was packed together so it was tight so the seeds wouldn't sink in. And because it was traveled all the time, the path didn't have any vegetation to hide the seed. So what happened? The birds came and they ate it. I have an area in my yard that is like the path. My driveway is about 2 feet too narrow. So when we get out of the car and we walk into the house, we've beaten a path over the past 11 years. There's no grass there, and I can't get anything to grow, and it's just dirt packed down. Jesus said that the seed that was sown on the path is like someone who hears the word but doesn't understand it. They hear about him, but they don't understand it. Now, this statement that he made was two different things. The first thing was an indictment against poor teachers. It was an indictment against teachers that would try to get up and use lofty words and explain the secrets of the kingdom without using simple stories. Isn't it cool how smart Jesus is? Before the disciples even asked him, "Why do you teach using stories?" he used a story to teach them that they should teach using stories. It's so cool. Jesus knew that pretty soon he was going to be gone and that the disciples were going to be the ones doing the teaching. And because he knew that he had to let them know how to do it right. He had to let them know you've got to teach in a way whereby people can understand what you're saying. This is a message that all Christians need to know when we're sharing the story of Jesus. When we're telling our friends about Jesus, or we're telling strangers even about Jesus, we need to be able to make him relatable to them. We need to be able to tell the gospel in a way that they understand. Anyone who was in my youth group, there's a few people here who can tell you that I was the king of analogies. Man, I use analogies for everything. Spiritual stuff, non-spiritual stuff. Sometimes even with my kids, they'll break something and be like, "Well, it wasn't me. I didn't do it." And I'll have to use an analogy to explain to them. And then they're like, "Oh, wait, I was the one that did it." One year at youth camp, it even became a game. I taught this class at youth camp on dating and relationships. And in this class, I used an analogy to describe love as something that was kind of outside the box. And then for the rest of the week, students would come up to me who had been in that class, people who didn't even know me, and they would give me these random words like fire trucks or bicycles. And I would have to tell them how love is like a fire truck or a bicycle. It was a lot of fun. I loved doing it. It was a good exercise for me, and the kids enjoyed it. But Jesus used this first instance of seeds being sown to teach his disciples, keep it simple. Make it relatable. Make it where people can understand. But in addition to being an indictment on poor teachers, this statement that Jesus made about the seed that was sown on the path is also something else. It's talking about people who hear the word, but they don't understand their need for it. They hear about Jesus, but they don't understand the fact that they need him. These are people who, they're not murderers, they're not thieves, they don't cheat on their taxes, they're just good people. I'll tell you what, there's some areas they don't have a lot of these. Chicago, probably not a whole lot of good people. New York, not a lot of good people. But Northwest Arkansas, there's a ton of good people who don't know the Lord, and they don't know their need for him. They're thinking, well, why do I need this Lord of yours to change my life? I'm pretty good as it is. These are the type of people who, when they hear the gospel, the enemy comes and just takes it away before it has a chance to take root. The birds just come and eat the seeds. The second type of seeds were sown on rocky soil. The area there was very rocky, and there were some places where the soil was very shallow. And it was kind of like Arkansas. You guys have heard how we got Beaver Lake, right? There was a farmer one time that decided to make a garden. He went out and picked up all the rocks, and it rained the next day. That's how we have Beaver Lake. That's what this area was like. There were a lot of rocks. And Jesus said the second type of seed was sown on rocky soil. So it immediately, because there wasn't a lot of soil there, it would immediately sprout up. But then when summertime came, things got a little hot. The plants didn't have any roots, so they couldn't get the water that they needed, and the sun would scorch them and kill them. Jesus talks about this seed and says that it's like a person who hears the word and receives it with joy. They hear about Jesus and they say, yes, I want that. I want to have a better life. I want to serve this Jesus that you're talking about. But they don't ever go any deeper in their relationship. They live sort of like a Christian, but they don't ever spend time with the Lord trying to take their relationship to another level. They don't pray like on a daily basis and spend time with Him. They don't ever read their Bible to learn more about Jesus or to learn more about how they should live. They don't ever put down roots. So Jesus says when troubles come, when trials come, they fall away. They hear about Jesus and they're like, man, I need that. I want that. But they don't ever go any deeper. So then when living for Jesus gets a little bit tough, they're like, let's go back to the old way. I liked it better. Jesus said these people only last for a short time. And when trouble or persecution comes, they quickly go back to their old life. Then came the third type of seed. This is the type that's sown among the thorns. I hate thorn bushes, don't you? Man, they're miserable. This seed produces vegetation, but the thorns are so thick that it says it chokes out the new plant so that it can't survive. Jesus says that this is someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it out, making it unfruitful. This is a person who hears about Jesus, and they kind of know that they need Him. But when they're given the choice of, okay, do you want to give your life to Him? They love their life so much that they can't let it go. They're so enjoying the sin that they live in and the things that it brings them that they choose to just keep living the same way they are. It's one of the saddest ones to me. It's not the one that doesn't understand that they need Him, and it's not the one that does but just fails to take things to the next level. This person is just plain rebellious. They know they need Him. They don't care. A lot of people that are in this group are what I like to call someday people. These are the people that say, well, yeah, I probably need to go to church. I probably need to live better. I probably need to have a relationship with Jesus. Maybe someday. You know any someday people? And then there's the fourth type of seed. The seed that is sown on good soil. Jesus says this represents someone who hears the word. In other words, they hear about Jesus. They hear about the fact that there was this guy who decided to give up his life so that they could be forgiven of their sins. They hear about Jesus, and they understand that they need to be forgiven. This seed that's sown in good soil produces good fruit. This is the seed that we all need to be. So Jesus told this story, this parable, and it was a choose-your-own-adventure parable. You see, we all get to choose. In this story, you're the seed. But unlike the seed in the story, you get to choose in which soil you're going to be sown. Can you imagine if a seed had the ability to will itself to a certain area? Has anyone ever played that game Fortnite? At the beginning of the game of Fortnite, you jump out of an airplane and you're You're just kind of floating to the ground, and there's the whole game playing field, and you get to choose where to land. You just kind of steer your character, and then you eventually choose where to land. That's how I envision Jesus illustrating this story. We're the seed, and we get to choose where to land. You get to choose what soil you want to be sown in. So if you want to be sown on the path and eaten by birds, turn to page 32. If you want to be sown in rocky soil, to live like a Christian until things get tough, and then go back to the old way of living, we'll turn to page 40. If you want to be sown among the thorns and have your life choked out by the sin and the things that you're enjoying, the things that you think you like, turn to page 54. Or if you want to be sown in good soil, you want to live for Jesus and have a relationship with him, and someday have true life, turn to page 60. It was a choose-your-own-adventure parable. I loved those books. I think I probably read every one of them. You can find them at the library still if you're interested. I may go check one out this week just to read it. There was one that was a Western story that I really enjoyed. But I have to admit something to you. Sometimes I cheated. Because when you made your choice and you would turn to the page, sometimes you would see something like this. You begin slowly walking across the rickety bridge, but on your 6th step, the board gives way, and you plummet to your death on the rocks below. You should have known better than to try such a dumb move. You have died. The end. If you've read the story, you know I'm not lying. The stories had sense of humor to them. Kind of morbid for a kid, but talk about making the wrong choice, though. If you're a kid, especially one that didn't really like reading, after you've invested so much time into this story, to turn the page and see that. And on these pages, on the end pages, here's how they were set up. It would be a very brief synopsis on the top half of the page. And then in big letters, it would say, the end. And then on the bottom half of the page, there would be an illustration of your demise. These pages were very recognizable compared to a page full of words. So sometimes I would make my choice, and I'd keep my finger on the page where I came from. And if I turned over and I saw the words the end and an illustration, I'd flip on back and make the other choice. That's the bad part about those books. It's not like a video game. You could game the system if you weren't honest. But I guess in a way that represents life as well. Because there may be people in this room who you've had the opportunity to make this choice time and time again in your life. Maybe you've turned the page and you've gone down one path. And now you've wrapped back around and you're here again. And you're like, man, that path wasn't very fun. We may try to do things differently this time. The good news is you still have a chance. If you've made the wrong choice in the past, you still have a chance today to make the right choice. The bad news is you won't always have another chance. Because someday your life is going to come to an end. And you don't know when that's going to be. Every day people die out of the blue. There was a guy, he was a preacher friend of mine. still friends with his brother. He was probably my age, 2/3 of my size, real healthy looking guy. He was playing basketball one day with a bunch of guys. Shot a 3-point shot, made it, nothing but net, turned around and smiled and dropped. That was the end of his life. Pretty cool way to go, but I don't want to do it this young. You don't know when it's going to be. And you don't only have really death to worry about. I mean, you could say, well, I'm just going to go home and live in a bubble and nothing's going to get to me. Well, the Bible also tells us that someday Jesus is going to come back for his church. And he's going to take us all away. And everyone who's not part of that church, everyone who hasn't made the decision to be sown in good soil, they're going to be taken away. And when that happens, if you die or if Jesus comes back and if you've made the wrong choice, you'll have nothing in front of you except for the words "the end" and an illustration on the bottom of the page. And there won't be any turning back the clock. So today I want to ask you a question. And it's the same question that Joshua asked in Joshua chapter 24. Choose you this day whom you're going to serve. To what page do you want to turn? I'm going to ask everyone in the room to bow your head and close your eyes. I don't want anybody looking around. If you're here today and say, Pastor, I don't know about your teaching style, but for some reason, I feel like that I need to make a decision today. I want to be sown in good soil. I want to give my life to Jesus. I want to be forgiven for my sins, and I want to live for him. There's tons of people in this room who have already made this decision, and I promise you it's the best choice we've ever made in our lives. If that's you, I want you to lift up your hand right where you're at. Say, I want to give my life to Jesus today. Not a better day to do it than right now. Anyone at all? Just taking my time and scanning the room because there's a lot of people here. Lord, thank you so much for your word. Lord, thank you for the opportunity that you give us to choose where we will be sown. Lord, if there's anyone here today who has never made that decision, I pray that you will continue to draw them to you. Give them one more chance, God. And Lord, for the rest of us, I pray that you will help us to understand and never forget the urgency with which people need to be given the opportunity to choose. Lord, don't let us be lazy. Don't let us be stagnant. Let us be messengers for you. Thank you, Jesus.